Medici family famously produced two French queens. Caterina de Medici, or Catherine de Medicis, was the first. The second one was Maria de Medici, or Marie de Médicis. When Caterina first married into the French royal family, she was ostracized for being a commoner, a merchant's daughter. But Maria de Medici never had to face such an opposition from the French royals. What happened to this family between the times of the two queens? The family's rise originally began with Giovanni de Medici, a fairly ordinary Florentine merchant, but then became the banker to the papal treasury. His sons were Cosimo and Lorenzo. From Cosimo descended the main branch of the family. From Lorenzo, the cadet line. When Cosimo's son, Piero, died young, the reins fell to his grandson, Lorenzo de Medici, better known as Lorenzo il Magnifico. His brother Giuliano was famously stabbed to death in the Pazzi conspiracy during the Easter Mass in church, no less. Florence always knew how to keep its drama truly dramatic. Lorenzo died in his early 40s. He had three sons: Piero the Unfortunate, an ominous nickname if there ever was one, Giovanni, who joined the clergy, and Giuliano, named after his late uncle. The late Giuliano's illegitimate son, Giulio, was also raised with Lorenzo's three sons. But under the Piero the Unfortunate, the Medici were booted out of Florence thanks to the uprising led by a fanatical monk, Girolamo Savonarola. But their luck turned when Giovanni became Pope Leo X. The family came back with the Pope's backing. Giuliano became the city's ruler, then Lorenzo II, Piero's son, took over. He was the father of Caterina de Medici, who would later become Queen of France, much to the dismay of French nobles who thought this merchant family was beneath their dignity. And that's because, even until this time, the family did not have any hereditary noble title. They were de facto rulers of Florence, sure, but Florence was still, at least technically, a republic. And Lorenzo died when Caterina was still an infant, and the Medici family was driven out of Florence in another coup. They came back with the help of Giulio, who by this time became Pope Clement VII. Clement VII put a certain Alessandro, who is allegedly his own son but given to Lorenzo to be raised as Lorenzo's son, as ruler of Florence. Another relative, Ippolito, became a cardinal, which was in those days less a calling from God and more a way of keeping troublesome nephews out of family succession. And Clement VII persuaded the Holy Roman Emperor Karl V to make Alessandro the Duke of Florence, finally making the Medici family hereditary nobility. Alessandro was a violent, tyrannical, and generally insufferable man. He murdered Ippolito, alienated just about everyone, and finally was assassinated himself. The assassin? A Medici cousin, Lorenzino. It was all very Italian, very Guzzi of them. Daggers at dinner, cousins at your throat. And with Alessandro's death, the main line of Medici was extinct. The dynasty, as it stood, ended. When Alessandro met his untimely end, a few Florentine elders summoned a new candidate to rule the city, and that candidate was young Cosimo de' Medici. Who is this young Cosimo? Going back to the original Cosimo, his second son, Lorenzo, had a son, Pier Francesco de' Medici. Pier Francesco had two sons, Lorenzo di Pier Francesco de' Medici and Giovanni de' Medici. This Lorenzo had a grandson, a certain Lorenzino, who ended up murdering Alessandro. Both Pier Francesco and the elder son Lorenzo died when Giovanni, the second son, was still young, so he grew up under the family patriarch of the main line, Lorenzo il Magnifico. His son, Ludovico, became a renowned condottiero, or a mercenary captain, for his cousins, Leo X and Clement VII. Cosimo was Ludovico's son. So now why Cosimo? By this time, the emperor had made the Medici dukes, so the next ruler had to be a Medici. The trouble was, the main branch was extinct, so they had to pick from the cadet branch. The options were Lorenzino and Cosimo, but Lorenzino, mind you, had murdered Alessandro and was hiding out as a proper wanted man should be doing, which left Cosimo as the only choice. And Cosimo was only 17 at the time. The elders thought he was a simple, blank-faced youth they can control. 17, quiet, expressionless, a perfect puppet material. They even drafted a contract. Most of the Duke's powers would be handed to the Signoria, the ruling council. They gave it to him expecting him to sign, and he did, without any fuss. They rubbed their hands, certain that they had Florence in their hands again. But then, they did not expect Cosimo's next move. He placed his royal men in key posts, summoned a mercenary army into the city under the guise of strengthening the public order, and promptly took full control. The elders returned, waving their precious contract. And to that, Cosimo simply said, "Did I sign this? Surely not. If I did, I must have been distracted and overwhelmed. I couldn't have possibly known of its content and signed it. And if I signed it without knowing it, gentlemen, the contract is void." Cue gasp, outrage, and great gnashing of teeth. And to be honest, this was all very outrageous. But there was not much they could do. Cosimo had the soldiers, he had the city, and frankly, he was the only Medici candidate left standing. So, with a cool face and a steady hand, Cosimo duped them all. Cosimo became a quite successful ruler as the Duke of Florence. He sided with the Holy Roman Empire in the Italian Wars, annexed Siena into his territory, and was made the Grand Duke of Tuscany. So with this, the Medici family became the rulers of all of Tuscany. He maintained the close ties with the Habsburgs, and his son and heir, Francesco, even married the youngest daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand I. Cosimo had everything and achieved everything in life. But a talented heir was not one he was blessed with. Francesco was no prodigy. He had a sharp mind, yes, but no great talent for governance. What he had was curiosity, books, experiments, odd pursuits. That was his kingdom. When Cosimo retired in 1564, he made Francesco his regent and handed over governing of Tuscany to him. Francesco was an introverted, dutiful young man. He lacked his father's ambition, but was steady enough to guard what he had inherited. He gave money to the arts, he ran business ventures shrewdly, and then he locked himself away in his palace laboratory. Francesco loved science. He loved alchemy even more. While other princes sat in council chambers, Francesco sat by furnaces, watching metals melt. He had whole rooms in his palace converted into laboratories. Around the time Francesco de Medici was stepping in as a regent, there was a girl in Venice named Bianca Capello, 15 years old. She was a daughter of a patrician father, and more importantly, a mother from the Morosini family, which was one of the richest and most respected families in Venice. A perfect daughter of the Republic, and a perfect marriage prize. And then she vanished into thin air. The disappearance of Bianca Capello threw Venice into a panic. A noble girl, famed for her beauty, gone without trace. The Capello family was frantic. The whole city buzzed. But soon enough, the truth emerged. Bianca was in Florence, and not alone. She had fallen for a young Florentine, Pietro Bonaventuri, a handsome young man who had many Venetian ladies sighing after him. But he was also a gifted liar. He told Bianca a story, that he was the heir to one of the richest families in Florence. He wasn't, but love is deaf to reason, and Bianca believed him. When he suggested she elope to Florence with him, she agreed. So one night she slipped away, leaving her family behind and her city in uproar. But when she arrived in Florence, it was no fairy tale. Instead of palaces, Bianca found Pietro's shabby little house. No wealth, no grandeur, no bright future. Just a modest life. a marriage fraud. But in 16th century there was no going back, because she was carrying Pietro's baby. So Bianca became known as the Venetian lady in Florence. She raised the child, worked to support the household, and endured the commands of a demanding mother-in-law. It was a hard fall. A noble lady of Venice reduced to spinning and housework. She cried, she worked, she endured. And all the while Florence whispered, "Who was this strikingly beautiful stranger?" The whispers were soon carried back to Venice. Bianca's family learned that she ended up in Florence, and they tried to bring her home. They begged, they demanded, they sent envoys, but she refused. To return would mean disgrace. In the 16th century, a noble woman who had run away, borne a child, and defied her parents had no place left in Venetian society. Better to endure in Florence than to face that humiliation. This whole affair grew awkward enough that the Florentine government was concerned that this could sour the relationship with Venice. So the Duke, Cosimo, summoned Bianca to the Palazzo Vecchio to hear her side of the story. There she made it clear that she would not return to Venice. Cosimo, hearing her plea, decided to shield her. He wrote to Venice, "She is married, she is settled, she's a Florentine now." Bianca was allowed to stay, and with that, the matter was closed. Or so they thought. At her hearing, Francesco de Medici was also present, and with one look of her, he had fallen for Bianca. From the day he first saw her, he could not stop thinking about her. How could a woman so beautiful, so full of life, be condemned to misery because of one mistake? He pitied her, and then the pitying soon turned into pining, and then into lovesickness. Francesco decided that he needed to save her. But to save her, he first had to see her. That was easy enough. Whenever Venice lodged a protest about Bianca's case, Francesco, as regent, could summon her to hearings. These official meetings gave him the chance to see her. Bianca, quick as ever, understood, and she realized this was her lifeline out of the bottomless pit her life has become. So the affair began, an open secret. Some accounts claim Bianca was reluctant, but Francesco practically forced her into it. Or others say she was just playing hard to get. And yes, some others say she was in on it quite willingly. But whichever was the case, she soon had Francesco wrapped around her pinky. Meanwhile, Cosimo was arranging a marriage for Francesco, and this was a significant marriage. The bride, Joanna of Austria, was a daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand I. This was it. The family that had started as merchant bankers was now joining the ranks of bona fide royalty, marrying into the emperor's family. When Joanna has a child, that child would be the Medici with imperial blood. So Francesco quite willingly married her. His obsession for Bianca was, oh, never mind to you. He could always keep her as a mistress. And after all, it wasn't like he could marry Bianca or anything, since she was already married. Now for Joanna, this was a deeply disappointing marriage. Her husband was small, frail, and not very handsome. And Florence was no Vienna. The palaces were cramped and uncomfortable. And worst of all, Francesco treated her coldly, with barely disguised indifference. The more time passed, the more hopeless her situation felt. Homesickness and stress gnawed at her. Cosimo tried his best to keep his daughter-in-law happy, and even remodeled the Palazzo Vecchio's courtyard in Viennese style to make her feel at home. He bought her anything she wished. This was by all accounts the only kindness Joanna found in Florence. But no effort could hide Bianca. Joanna soon learned of her rival. How could she not? Everyone knew where Francesco was spending his time. By then, Francesco had already made an arrangement with Pietro Bonaventuri, Bianca's husband. Pietro was paid handsomely, given a position at court, and was even offered another mistress on the side. All he had to do was to turn a blind eye, and he did. And Francesco promptly bought Bianca a palace. You can still see it, near the Santa Trinita Bridge, lavishly decorated outside, too lavish to miss. Bianca lived on the third floor, and Pietro lived on the first. To the outside world, it looked like a respectable household. Francesco would enter the building under the pretext of visiting Pietro, and simply went upstairs to Bianca's rooms. Pietro kept quiet at first, but then he became greedy. He demanded more money, threatening to expose Francesco. But that was a foolish move. Blackmail works only if you can make the victim feel like there's no other way out. But would it work against Francesco? One dawn, Pietro turned up dead in the street, cut down by hired killers. The culprits were never found. Officially, investigators muttered about people from Venice seeking revenge for Bianca's scandal and whatnot. Case closed. But anyone who knew the story assumed that Francesco and Bianca had quietly removed their license. Then, in 1574, Cosimo de Medici died. Before the end, he had pleaded with his son, "Treat Joanna better. Secure the succession. Think of Florence." Francesco listened politely and ignored everything. For Bianca, it was a precarious life. She was Francesco's great passion, yes, but still without title, without security. That insecurity gnawed at her. So she would occasionally threaten to leave, and it worked every time. Francesco showered her with gifts every time she threatened to leave. First came the Rucellai Palace, considered the most beautiful residence in Florence. Then he built her a country estate on a staggering scale, the Villa di Pratolino. It devoured time, money, and resources, but it became a marvel of Renaissance engineering and art. But while Francesco adored Bianca, Florence despised her. What people saw was a foreigner who had bewitched their duke and was bleeding the treasury dry with palaces and follies. The harder she clung to Francesco, the more the city turned against her. Still, Bianca's ambition was only awakening. Now that she got out of the miserable marriage and mundane existence, she began to imagine herself not merely as a mistress, but as a duchess. If she bore a son, she could claim the title of Grand Duchess, and her child might one day inherit the duchy. Of course, there was Joanna. The Austrian princess remained the legitimate consort, but she was frail, unloved, and critically, still childless. But there was another problem. Bianca herself had borne no child to Francesco either. And so, it became a cruel contest between the two women, which one would produce an heir first. And that is a story for the next episode. So please like and subscribe to continue receiving the stories from history. Also check out our playlist for the stories on other countries and periods. It really helps a small channel like us.